The wind dragged dry snow across the sodden prairie, scouring the earth in pale, bitter strokes. Frost bit through her gloves as she tried to fix the wagon wheel, but the spokes were splintered. Useless. She had tied the mule to the fence post, though there was nothing left of the fence but rotten wire. One child cried in the wagon bed, the other shivered beside her, lips blue, knees drawn tight to his chest. The girl hadn't spoken since the river crossing 3 days ago. The homestead they passed at dawn was a shell-shuttered windows, chimney black with creosote. No wood smoke, no light, no welcome. Maura blinked hard, trying to keep the tears from freezing on her lashes. Her boots were soaked through. Her left thumb was bleeding. The sky had turned the color of iron, and in the distance, the land curved upward into a ridge of hills, cold minus boned and indifferent. There was no one coming. She pressed her hands against the wheel again, breath ragged. The cold made everything quiet. Even the mule had stopped fussing, sensing the stillness that hung over the land like a threat. The boy leaned against the wagon, chin tucked deep into his coat. "Mama," he said, voice small. She didn't answer. She hadn't eaten in 30-6 hours. The last biscuit had gone to the girl at noon yesterday. There had been beans before that, but they were gone too. She had prayed. Not aloud, not anymore. Just inside, where the silence felt like a place God might hear her. Back in Wyoming, before Walter died, they'd had a stove and a garden. A roof that didn't leak. Chickens sometimes. But a mining company came with silver promises and a deed dispute, and then nothing. Walter had left in autumn to argue with them. He returned in a box the following spring. Now there was a letter, folded and folded again, in her skirt pocket, an offer of work on a ranch near the Colorado border. A cousin of a cousin. A man who didn't write it kindly, but she had nowhere else. She rose slowly, the bones in her back protesting. "We can't stay here." The boy nodded but didn't move. She climbed into the wagon, lifted the girl, wrapped her tighter in the blanket. Her body was too light. They would walk. It was 5 miles, maybe 6. The sun would be gone into hours. They could follow the road until it bent toward the ridge. She left the wagon behind. The snow deepened as they walked. Her boots left torn prints. The wind turned her scarf stiff and useless. She carried the girl after the boy stumbled. Her arms burned, then went numb. Still, she kept moving. If she stopped, she would not rise again. She was nearly past feeling when she saw smoke. A narrow trail of it, far off the road, rising straight from the hollow between the trees. Then the smell of burning pine, real fire. "Mama," the boy said again, but louder. A cabin, set back from the road, half hidden by trees. It looked occupied. Fresh minus cut wood stacked along the side. A curtain in the window. She hesitated. This was the cousin's place. She knocked once. The door opened, not all the way but enough. A man filled the frame, tall, thick minus shouldered, coat and fastened. His beard was dark, his face marked by cold and caution. She cowled and spake, just stood there, child in her arms, boy at her side. The man said nothing, only looked long and hard, his eyes flicking between her face, the girl's limp hand, the boy's cracked lips. "Get in," he said finally. "Stove's on." She stepped inside. Warmth hit her like a blow. The cabin smelled of coffee and smoke and something cooking. Her knees buckled. He caught her, not kindly, not cruelly, just enough to lower her to the floor. The boy followed, silent, afraid. "I've got soup," the man said, moving toward the pot. She cowed in answer. Her throat was thick, her mouth too dry, but she saw the girl's eyes flutter, saw the boy lean toward the fire. He ladled stew into bowls, set them on the table, pushed one gently toward the boy, passed one to her. "You're really freezing," he said. "Eh?" She lifted the spoon with a shaking hand, tasted salt and meat and warmth. It filled her mouth, slid down her throat like mercy. The man sat back in his chair, watching, not talking. Outside, the wind howled against the door, but in that room time slowed. The stove ticked. The boy slurped. The girl opened her eyes. The man said, "You look like you've come from nowhere." She met his gaze. Her voice was hoarse. "That's not far off." He said nothing to that, just nodded once, as if he understood without needing to hear more. He rose and added more wood to the stove. The fire flared and hissed. Shadows stretched longer across the walls. The boy had stopped shivering. His bowl was empty now, and he sat with his back pressed to the warm stone hearth, eyes drooping. The girl had curled against her mother's spoon and touched in her lap. But she was breathing steady, slow. Her fingers had regained color. The man brought down two wool blankets from a shelf. One he handed to Mara. The other he draped over the children without asking. She watched his hands. They were rough and red from cold, but careful. He moved like a man used to solitude, but not untouched by grace. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, "long as you need." Mara tried to thank him, but the words wouldn't form. Her tongue felt thick, heavy with all she hadn't said in weeks, maybe months. He must have seen that because he didn't push her. He went back to his chair by the fire and poured a cup of coffee from the pot. He offered her some, but she shook her head. She was too tired. The heat from the soup, the flames, the blankets, everything was pulling her down like a tide. She didn't remember lying down, only the feel of wood beneath her hip and the boy's slow breath near her cheek. She kept her hand on the girl's chest just to feel the rise and fall, and then nothing. When she woke, it was still dark, but quieter. The wind had died. The man was asleep in his chair, his boots still on. The fire had gone 2 coals, and she could see the soft orange glow painting the floor. The children were wrapped together now, sharing one blanket, their cheeks pink, alive. She sat up, body aching, back stiff. She looked around the room, sparse but lived minus in. A rifle above the door. A set of tools hung neat on the far wall. A cotton hat on a peg. A cup still warm from someone's head. There was a warm Bible on the table. Next to it, a tin plate with the edge bent. She looked back at the man. He opened his eyes. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Didn't need to." She rose, stretched, winced. "We didn't mean to burden you." "You didn't," he said. "You needed a place." That's reason enough. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her into winters. She moved toward the window. The snow had stopped. The world outside was clean and white, all sharp edges softened. The mule stood beneath the eaves, crusted in frost but still upright. He followed her gaze. "I can hitch your wagon to my team, get you to where you're headed once the sun's up." Mara nodded slowly. "It's a ranch near Yoderes Creek. A cousin's land. Or used to be." "I know it," he said. "Rough country, but not bad." She turned to him. "You've lived here long?" 7 years. A pause. "Built this place myself." She studied him for a moment, then asked, "What's your name?" "Clay." She let that settle. "And Murr." "The boy's James." "The girl's Ruth." He nodded. "Good names." The fire hissed softly as a log collapsed in on itself. He walked over, crouched, added more wood. The orange glow flared again, lighting the rough lines of his face. He looked younger in that moment, or maybe just more tired. She noticed a scar across his wrist. "Oh, deep. Like it came from something sharp and fast." "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded once, not meeting her eyes. She didn't press. The children stirred behind her, and she went to them. She tucked Ruth's hair behind her ear and kissed James on the crown of his head. She hadn't done that in days, maybe longer. They would leave soon. She didn't know what waited at the cousin's ranch. Maybe nothing. Maybe something they could shape. But this man had given them something she didn't realize. She still believed in kindness without question. "I warm fire in a cold world." She turned back toward Clay. "Thank you." He gave a quiet nod. "You can stay longer if needed." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Instead, she sat near the fire, across from him. Close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to leave it her choice. Outside, the world was beginning to lighten. If the trail felt real, subscribe and continue. The next morning passed slow, wrapped in quiet work. Clay brought him water from the creek, breaking a thin skin of ice on the surface. Murrah helped him boil it for washing, scrubbing the children's hands and faces clean. She found a rhythm in the movements, wringing cloth, smoothing rust-stangled hair, folding what little they had. She watched Clay from the corner of her eye. He moved without hurry but never wasted a step. He didn't ask questions, didn't fill the air with words, but he offered clean socks, a heel of bread, a spare coat for the boy, and each small offering felt weightier than all the letters and promises she'd chased in the months before. By mid-morning the snow had softened under the pale sun, and Clay hitched his team to her wagon without a word. The children were fed, wrapped warm, and half asleep by the time the wagon creaked out toward Yoder's Creek. Mara walked beside him. He didn't ask why she was alone, where her husband had gone, what she hoped to find on that cousin's land. Maybe he already knew. They passed long ridges of blackened cottonwoods, the skeletal remains of last summer's fire. Eyehawks circled above them once, twice before drifting out of sight. There was no sound but the crunch of snow under boots and hooves and the creak of old wood. After a while, Clay said, "Folks out here don't always come together. Land's too wide. Time moves different." Mara nodded. She felt that in her bones. Days stretched, then vanished. You could go a whole season without hearing your own name out loud. They reached a rise, and he pointed with a nod. "That's the place." Down below, a squat house sat near the edge of the creek. The barnlet half-minus collapsed. No smoke from the chimney. A windmill turned lazily. She squinted. "Looks empty." Could be. He didn't sound surprised. The wagon pulled close. She jumped down, boots sinking into wet snow, walked up the steps, knocked. Nothing. She opened the door. Inside was dust and silence. A broken chair, a few tin plates, a hearth filled with ashes. James stood at the threshold behind her, small fingers clutching her skirt. "They're gone," she said aloud, though she had known it before she knocked. Clay stepped in behind her, surveying the room. Could have moved east, or died. Hard to know. Mara didn't speak. She was so tired her thoughts felt like water slipping through her hand. This house was no answer, no beginning, just another hollow. She turned to Clay. "Well, keep going." "To where?" She shook her head. "I don't know." He studied her for a long beat, then said quietly, "You could come back." "For now." She stared at him. "Why?" His jaw flexed like he didn't want to say the thing he felt. Then he said it anyway. "Because I've lived quiet for too long. And I saw the way you held that girl, like the world would split apart if you let go. That kind of love, it's something a man forgets is real." She didn't answer, just looked down at her hands, red and chapped and trembling. "You don't have to say anything," he added. "But the door's not closed." Ruth began to cry softly in the wagon. James turned and ran to her. Mara stood in that half-minus empty house with the wind rattling the shutters, and something inside her cracked. Not broken, just loosened. She stepped outside. "He'll come back," she said, voice raw. "For a little while." Clay tipped his head. "Then we best hurry. Sun won't wait." They loaded what little she had, blankets, one satchel, the Bible, and headed back the way they'd come. Mara walked behind the wagon. The land around her seemed less vast now, not because it had changed, but because someone had said she could stay. She didn't know how long she would, but she would start with a day, then maybe another. They returned to the cabin in silence, not out of awkwardness, but out of something steadier, mutual exhaustion perhaps, or the plainness of acceptance. No promises were spoken, no plans made. The sun slid lower behind the hills, casting long blue shadows across the snow, and the trees stood black and still, like quiet witnesses. Inside, the warmth welcomed them like breath. Clay went straight to the stove, stirred the coals, and laid in fresh wood. Mara set Ruth down on the bedroll near the fire. James sat at the table, his small hands cupped around a mug of warm broth Clay had left waiting. Ma stood in the center of the room for a moment, unsure where to place herself. She was used to moving, always packing, fixing, surviving. But now there was nowhere she needed to go. "Sit," Clay said, nodding to the other chair. She did. He ladled more soup and passed her a bowl. The smell alone nearly broke her. "It's not much," he said. "It's more than I've had in days." They ate quietly. Clay never looked at her too long, but when he did, there was no pity in his eyes, only something low-minus burning, watchful. Later, after the children were asleep, he pulled a small bottle from a drawer and offered her a sip. She hesitated, then took it. The taste burned her tongue, warmed her chest. "Tell me something," he said. She wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve. "Like what?" "Anything real." She thought for a moment. "I still talk to my husband. In my head. especially when I'm scared. He nodded like that made perfect sense. She passed the bottle back. Your turn. He didn't drink, just held it, eyes on the fire. My brother died in that river bend past the ridge. 3 years ago. Tried to cross when it was too high. Mule slipped. Sigh. I still look for him in the water sometimes. Like you'll see him standing there mad as ever, asking why the hell I let him go first. A long silence sat between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was human. I never wanted to come this far west, she said. But Walter wanted land. Thought I'd make a man of him. And did it. She looked down. I think it broke him. Clay didn't reply. She studied his hands in the firelight, scarred knuckles, calloused fingers. Not cruel, not soft either. A man who knew how to fix things, and what it felt like to fail anyway. He said, you can stay as long as you want. Don't need to explain yourself. Mara met his eyes. And if I do want to explain, then I'll listen. She exhaled slow, her chest ached with it. I've been holding the whole world up for so long. I forgot how to let someone else hold anything. You don't have to let go all at once. A quiet beat passed. I'll sweep tomorrow, she said. Mend that curtain too. He'd be obliged. He offered her a bedroom near the stove. The children were curled together under the heavy wool blankets, breaths soft and even. She lay down close enough to feel their warmth. Before he turned in, Clay knelt by the fire and stoked it one last time. The light flickered across his face. She watched him, not for safety, not out of fear. Just watched. Then she closed her eyes and slept. And for the first time in many months, she did not dream of loss. The next days unfolded in quiet tasks, as if the earth itself held its breath while they figured out how to live near each other. Mara swept out the corners of the cabin, dust thick from months of solitude. She boiled the linens, patched Clay's shirts without being asked. Clay chopped wood in the mornings, came back with game hanging from his shoulder or a fish wrapped in wet burlap. Neither tried to name what was forming between them. In the afternoon, she walked the children along the creek. James found smooth stones and lined them on the fence post like they were coins. Ruth didn't speak much, but she held her mother's hand now and hummed little bits of songs Mara thought she'd forgotten. Clay repaired the sagging corner of the roof one day while Mara handed him nails. She watched how he worked, no flourish, just care. When the hammer slipped and caught his thumb, he let out a low grunt but didn't curse. Just looked at her with a sheepish twist of his mouth. You always this quiet? She asked. Only when I got something worth listening to. That made her laugh short and real. He looked surprised, pleased, even. She cooked that night, something close to stew, and though it was thin, they ate it like a feast. Clay passed the bread without comment when she served herself last. Later, when the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, they sat across from each other again. This time closer. She asked, why did you stay here, all alone? He shrugged and said, used to be a woman. Before the war, before all this, chest buried up by the ridge. After her, I didn't see the point in leaving. Mar didn't speak. Grief, she'd learned, didn't fade. It just changed shape. He continued, thought maybe this place could hold all of it. Turns out, it just held me. They sat in that, the air between them full of what was said. I used to think, she said slowly, if I just worked hard enough, I could keep everything from falling apart. But it falls anyway. It always falls. Clay nodded once, like he knew that weight too. But then he looked at her not with pity, not with want, just steady. Sometimes things fall to make room. She felt that in her throat, in the space behind her ribs. The next morning, Clay brought the children outside to help him tend the mule. James held the feed bucket proudly. Ruth watched with wide eyes as Clay showed her how to check the hooves. Mara stood at the doorway, arms crossed against the cold, and watched her children laugh. She hadn't heard them laugh since the train station in Laramie. Before the snow, before the silence. Clay glanced up at her, held her gaze. She stepped down from the stoop and joined them. There was work to do always. But for once, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like building, like beginning. Spring came slow, the way it always did in high country. The snow shrank into the gullies and dark furrows, and the creek ran high with meltwater. Maud clung two boots, two skirts to the children's knees. Life pressed up from the thawing ground in small, stubborn ways, green shoots, bird calls, the soft bleat of deer in the woods. Mara stood at the coastline one morning, fingers rough on the washboard. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Her back ached, but it was a good ache, earned through something real. Behind her, Clay was driving fence posts into the thawed ground. James held the twine, his little face intent. Ruth sat in the dirt, singing to a stick doll shed made from rags and straw. They didn't look like people surviving anymore. They looked like a family. That scared her. Later, when the work was done and the stew was simmering, she sat on the porch alone, picking at a piece of thread in her apron. The cabin door creaked, and Clay stepped out beside her. He didn't sit, just leaned against the post. "You've been quiet," he said. She nodded. "I don't know how to want something and not be afraid of losing it." Clay looked out at the horizon, where the sky burned soft gold behind the trees. "You ain't wrong to be scared. But that fear don't mean the thing isn't worth it. I used to think love was safety," she said. "Now I think it might be the opposite." "That's closer to the truth," he said. "Love's dangerous. It changes things." She turned to him. "You'd take that risk again? After what you lost?" His jaw tightened. "I didn't think I would. But then you knocked on my door." They stood there a while, watching the wind lift the edge of the washcloths, the sun catching on the line like glass. "I still talk to him sometimes," she admitted. "Walter. In my head." Clay didn't flinch. "Then he must have been a good man." "He tried to be," she said. "But the world didn't leave him much room." "And what about you?" Clay asked. "What do you want, Ma?" She didn't answer right away. The truth felt too big, too raw. But she looked at her children, asleep just inside that cabin, and then at the man who had made space for her to become more than just what she had survived. "I want to stop running," she said. "I want to plant something and see it grow. I want to wake up in a place that remembers me." Clay's eyes didn't leave hers. "Then stay." It was a plea. It was an offering. She stepped toward him, just one step, and this time she didn't look away. By summer, the land had changed. The ridge turned green, wildflowers blooming low and bright across the field like forgotten promises come back to life. The mule grew fat on good grass. Ruth's cheeks rounded, and James ran barefoot through the creek, whooping like some wild creature set free. The cabin no longer felt borrowed. It felt built, layered with small, necessary things: the sound of soup bubbling, the echo of a lullaby, the low murmur of Clay's voice as he read by lantern light. Mara mended everything: curtains, Clay's shirts, the path from the well to the door. She planted beans and corn in neat rows along the fence line, and though most would fail in the rocky soil, it wasn't about the harvest. It was about staying still long enough to try. Clay was different now, too. Softer in ways you wouldn't see unless you looked for them. The way he set down tools more gently. The way he brushed Ruth's hair from her forehead when she fell asleep at the table. The way he waited before speaking to let her be heard first. One night after the children had gone to bed, Mara sat with him on the porch, the sky thick with stars. "I used to think I was strong because I could survive," she said, her voice quiet. "But now I wonder if real strength's letting someone carry a little of it with you." Clay didn't reply right away. Just passed her a cup of coffee, steam curling between them like breath. "My father taught me to fight with my hands," he said finally. "Taught me how to hunt, fix a roof, dig a grave. But he never taught me how to stay. I had to learn that myself." She looked at him. "And did you?" "I'm still learning." Their hands brushed between them. Neither moved away. The next morning a letter came tied with twine and dust, from a cousin who hadn't known if she was dead or remarried or lost in some mining camp. There was news: a job offer in the nearest town, better pay, a place for the children to attend school, a room of their own. She read it twice, fingers trembling. When Clay found her near the garden, the letter hung loose in her hand. "You going?" he asked, voice steady. "I don't know." He nodded like he'd been expecting it. "It's a good offer," she said, not quite looking at him. "It is. I don't want to leave, but I want more for that." Clay crouched to pull a weed near her boot. "Then you go." And if you decide to come back, you'll find the gate open. Her throat tightened. You let me walk away. He stood, eyes meeting hers. You're not mine to keep. You're yours to choose. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat between the children, watching them breathe, her heart split clean down the middle. At dawn, she packed the letter away in the drawer and left it there. Clay found her in the garden with a shovel in her hand, marking rows for the late squash. You staying? He asked. She didn't stop working. I never said I was leaving. He smiled just once, the kind of smile that stays long after it's gone. Later that week, she moved her things into the small room near his, not because she had to, because she wanted to. And when Ruth woke in the night crying from a dream, it was Clay who rose and lifted her gently, holding her close until her sobs softened into sleep. They didn't speak of marriage yet, or forever, but there were signs: his boots beside hers, her shawl on his chair, the way they reached for the same pot, the same rhythm, the same hope. There was peace not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of something new, something earned. By autumn, the land gave what it could. The garden yielded crooked carrots and a few stubborn squash, the beans thin but enough to salt and save. Clay dug a root cellar just behind the cabin, and Mara lined it with jaws, her hands steady now practiced. The children helped carry kindling and stack wood, their laughter echoing across the ridge. They were no longer guests in that place. They belonged to it and it to them. One morning, Mara found James sitting beside Clay on the porch, the boy asking about horses and the price of saddles. Clay answered each question with quiet patience, sketching the shape of a bridle in the dirt with a stick. He didn't talk to him like a child. He talked to him like a man who might one day need to make his own way. Later that evening, after supper, Mara sat across from Clay by the fire, Ruth curled against her side. A girl had taken to humming again, not out of sadness but contentment. The same tune shed clung to that first cold night. Do you ever think of leaving? Mara asked, her voice soft, more curiosity than fear. Clay looked at the fire. I used to. Thought there might be something out east that made more sense. But I've come to see there's a kind of peace in staying put. You dig deep enough, things grow. She nodded. It's not the life I imagined, but maybe it's the one that's real. He glanced over, expression unreadable. Do you want more? She thought about it, about the letter she still hadn't burned, about the way the children looked at Clay, about the quiet that had turned from silence into comfort. I want this, she said, and I want to make it last. Clay stood, disappeared into the back room, and returned with a small tin box. He handed it to her. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, was a simple gold band, worn smooth by time. It was my mother's, he said. I've carried it with me a long while, waiting for a reason. Mara stared down at it. Clay, I'm not asking now. Not yet. Just letting you know I'm ready when you are. Her throat closed up. She reached across the table and took his hand, not just in thanks, but in recognition. She said nothing. Didn't need to. 2 nights later, she slipped the ring on before dinner. Quietly, no speech, no ceremony. Clay saw it and didn't smile, just nodded once. But his hand found hers beneath the table. That first snow came early. The children pressed their faces to the window, marveling at the soft white covering the fields. The world hushed itself again, but this time it didn't feel like an end. They had food. They had warmth. They had each other. Mara stood in the doorway with Clay behind her, his hand resting lightly at her back. She looked out over the land, the long stretch of hills, the roofs she helped repair, the rows she'd planted, now sleeping under snow. She was no longer a widowed woman trying to survive. She was a mother, a wife, a settler of new ground, and for the first time in years, the future didn't scare her. It waited. The West never tells just one story. Subscribe.